Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm your host, Larry Swikart, co-author. Patriots History of the United States, now in its 41st printing. The updated 20th anniversary edition will be available sometime this summer. It's up, it's in PDF form. We're trying to figure out how best to roll it out, but it should be out probably by mid-April at the latest. And we will just put that on the website as a gift to all of the Wild World of History subscribers and followers and everybody else. But first we're going to offer it to our VIP members, kind of an advanced peek. And then after that, we'll put it up for everybody. So I'm not sure about the exact timing, but it will be going up. Remember, Patriots History of Globalism is coming out here in 2 weeks. Get your advanced copy now. Now, if you want an autographed copy, here's how to do it. You order from Amazon, email me, and have them put my address in Amazon. They'll deliver it to me. Make sure you give me your address in an email. I'll sign it and forward it to you at no extra cost. So consider that if you want to do that. If you're not a member of the Wild World of History VIP, you're missing out. I've got at least 40, maybe 50 hours of video in different lessons than Patriots History. One on Reagan, the American president, one on Churchill integrity, one on the 1620 default, which is the answer to the 1619 project. In other words, why is America exceptional? Well, you can find it in that series. It's only $6.99 a month, folks. You can't beat that for all. And there's tons of free stuff on the site too. But there are others lesson plans as well as a PDF book called All Thumbs: Why Our Obsession with Cell Phones is Damaging Our Kids. So sign up for the VIP, $6 a month, can't beat it. And let's get started. We are in the lead up to the American Civil War in the 1850s chapter called A House Dividing. And we're in a section called the Dark Nether Side. Now, this is starting on page 268 today. Remember, if you have a different edition than the 15th anniversary edition, the pages are not going to line up. And in some cases, if it's really old, the headers won't line up. But a good way to check this out is a chart that we have here. So look for the chart that says Germans and Irish. And we'll get to this in a minute. Okay. Following the potato famine in Ireland in 1840s, when 1/3 of the total population of Ireland disappeared, new waves of poor Irish arrived in the Boston and New York City areas, with an estimated 20% of those who set sail dying en route. From 1841 to 1850, 750,000 Irish arrived on American shores, and unlike other immigrants, they arrived as families, not single males. Then from 1851 to 1860, another 914,000 immigrated. Eventually, there were more Irish in America than in Ireland, and more Irish in New York than in Dublin. Fresh from decades of political repression by the British, the Irish congregated in the big coastal cities, and seeing the opportunity to belong to part of the power structure, they, more than any other immigrant group, moved into the police and fire departments. An 1869 list of New York City's Irish and German office holders, the only two immigrant groups even mentioned, reveals stunning dominance of the Irish. In the mayor's office, there were 2 Germans and 11 Irish. In the alderman's chambers, there were 2 Germans, 34 Irish. Street department, no Germans, 87 Irish. Comptroller, 2 Germans, 126 Irish. Sheriff, only 1 German sheriff and 23 Irish sheriffs. And police captains, no Germans and 32 Irish. Now, a great example of this, and don't show your kids the whole movie. You got to be selective here. But it's Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Gangs of New York. where he plays an Irish immigrant who is fighting against Daniel Day-Lewis, who plays a butcher, and who heads up the nativist or the American group against the Irish group. Now, the Irish were, this movie makes the Irish look all wonderful and everything. They were just as discriminatory against Germans and everybody else as the nativists were against the Irish. But in the movie, they withhold their support from boss William Marcy Tweed until they get what they want, which is an Irish sheriff. And I don't know spoilers here, but eventually Bill the Butcher kills the Irish sheriff. And so there's a big gang war at the end of this movie. A lot of sex, a lot of foul language and stuff, but it is very historically accurate of what's going on in these big cities, and especially in the quest for minorities like the Irish to gain power. Now, here's what's interesting. Thomas Sowell has a great book called Ethnic America. I urge you to look this up. It's old. I think it's 30 years old now, but it's very good. And he also has a book called The Economics and Politics of Race. And both of these books make about the same point, which is that ethnic groups go into different businesses, vocations, based on their historical experience. So like we said, the Irish, having had no power whatsoever in Ireland, English controlled everything, when they get here, they don't seek economic power, they seek political power in the form of controlling government jobs. And to this day, you look at the list of firefighters killed on 9/11, and it's disproportionately Irish. They still dominate the police and the fire departments in New York City. Sowell pointed out that, for example, you have a huge group of Vietnamese in Los Angeles that control at one time about 90% of the nail salon business. You've got a big group of Lebanese in Atlanta that control a lot of the grocery chains, and so on and so forth. Different groups find different niches where they can not only survive, but thrive and kind of dominate. For years, the Jews were in clothing because they were, seamstresses and clothing manufacturer, though not design. You don't find a lot of major Jewish names in the top group of designers, but you do find them in controlling a lot of the clothing companies, manufacturing areas. Likewise, Jews went into finance, which in the late 1800s was still a kind of a dirty, disreputable place to work, occupation. You didn't want to be known as a banker. Now, of course, J.P. Morgan changes all that, and Morgan's a Presbyterian. But nevertheless, by that time, Jews such as Lehman Brothers had gotten into Goldman Sachs had gotten into the banking business, and there's this notion that the Jews control finance, so they really don't. Protestants pretty much control finances even today, but there is this notion that the Jews were more heavily involved than they were. And again, that's because it was an area where no one else wanted to go into. So keep that in mind. By the way, Sowell points out that it's not just in America. There's not just discrimination in America. That in Argentina, Lebanese and Germans control a huge part of the upper wealth categories. They moved there, of course, from Europe and Lebanon. In Vietnam, the Chinese still control a lot of they're kind of the top 1%ers in Vietnam. So wherever you go, any country in the world, you find these odd groups who've resettled there, who through very hard work and some, cohesiveness, they tend to stick together, end up succeeding. All right, those books again are Ethnic America and The Economics and Politics of Race. Hibernian primacy, that's Irish, in New York City administration was so overwhelming that even in the wake of 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City a century and a half later, the names of the slain firefighters and police were overwhelmingly Irish. Although some moved south, especially the Presbyterian Scots-Irish, new immigrants from the Emerald Isle generally remained urban and northern. Moreover, the new Irish were Catholic Irish who repudiated latitudinarianism and arrived with their own priests. They had little experience with common law. Such malleability when it came to voters meant that big city bosses herd them like livestock, told them who to vote for, and warned them not to think for themselves, unquote. Some already saw this as a problem. An editorial in 1855 from The Citizen, an Irish-American newspaper, noted, "Westward ho! The great mistake that immigrants, particularly Irish immigrants, make on arriving in this country is that they remain in New York and other Atlantic cities till they are ruined instead of proceeding at once to the Western country where a virgin soil teeming with plenty invites them to its bosom." And another movie that I'll recommend here is Far and Away. And I haven't seen it. I've seen parts of it. But as I recall, Tom Cruise plays an Irish immigrant who goes on the Oklahoma land rush and gets his own land out there. Why didn't more do this? Well, potato farming in Ireland is very different from wheat farming on the prairie or learning to raise cattle or sheep. These things are just not skills that are easily transferred. So the Irish tended to go with what they knew, and there wasn't a lot of potato planting in America until you get out to Idaho. So the Irish tended to hang around in the cities. It is true that the land was virtually free on the frontier, even if basic tools were not. Stephen Thernstrom found that if immigrants simply left New England, their chances for economic success dramatically improved, especially as they moved into the ranks of the skilled laborers. More than the Dutch or the Germans, the Irish suffered tremendous discrimination. The work of a deranged Protestant girl, Maria Monk, called Awful Disclosures of the Hotel Dieu in Montreal, 1836, circulated in the United States and fomented anti-Catholic bias that touched off the no popery crusade that afflicted the predominantly Catholic Irish. Monk's surreal work related incredibly fantastic tales of her life in a convent in Montreal, where she claimed to have observed tunnels leading to the burial grounds for the babies produced by the illicit relations between priests and nuns, as well as allegations of seductions in confessionals. The church launched a number of convent inspections that completely disproved these nonsensical claims, but the book had its effect. Protestant mobs in Philadelphia, reacting to the bishop's request for tax money to fund parochial schools, stormed the Irish sector of town and set off dynamite in Catholic churches. More than older immigrant groups, the Irish gravitated to the Democratic Party in overwhelming numbers, partly because of the anti-elite appeal of the Democrats, which was largely imaginary, as you know. Politically, the Irish advanced steadily by using the Democratic Party machinery to elect Irishmen as the mayors of Boston in the 1880s. But there was an underside to this American dream because the Irish, quote, brought to America a settled tradition regarding the formal government as illegitimate, and an informal one as bearing the true impress of popular sovereignty. Political corruption was ignored. Stealing an election was rascally, not to be approved, but neither quite to be abhorred. That translated into widespread graft bribery and vote fraud. They had it then too, which was made all the easier by political parties that simply required the parties to, quote, get out the vote, not get out the legal vote. Still a problem today. These traits, The Irish willingness to vote as a bloc for Democrats made them targets for the Know Nothing Party and other nativist groups. The experiences of Germans, the other main immigrant group, differed sharply from the Irish. First recruited to come to Pennsylvania by William Penn, Germans came to the United States in a wave, 951,000 of them, in the 1850s, following the failure of the 1848 democratic revolutions in Germany. Early Germans in Philadelphia were Mennonites, but other religious Germans followed, including Amish and Calvinists, originating the popular but wrong name, Pennsylvania Dutch, which is a mispronunciation of Deutsch, D-E-U-S-C-H, or German, Pennsylvania German. The Germans often brought more skills than the Irish, especially in the steel, mechanical, musical instrument trades, including Rudolf Wurlitzer and later Henry Steinway, whose original name is Steinweg, and brewing with brewers such as Schlitz, Pabst, and Budweiser. They also had an experience in land ownership and had no shortage of good ideas, including the Kentucky long rifle, the Conestoga wagon. John Augustus Roebling invented the wire cable for the suspension bridge to Brooklyn. John Barsh and Henry Lom pioneered eyeglass lenses and manufacturing, and Henry Heinz built a powerful food company from the ground up, Heinz 57, right? So you see how your choices not only lead you into different areas of work, but may limit you in terms of your wealth. Because even as much as you can steal or be corrupt, it's pretty hard to get super wealthy in politics. Now, I know many of our current politicians come in with nothing and leave multi-millionaires. I get it. But by and large, especially as you get down to levels of state assemblymen, city assemblymen, mayors, governors, the money's harder to come by in terms of theft. And so by going into politics, the Irish, in fact, limited their wealth capabilities while the Germans accelerated theirs. And the Germans, who were inventing all these things, were patenting them, getting patents for them. What does that do? That brings you royalties over time that start to accrue. The more patents you own, the more money you're going to get in patent royalty payments. So it's sort of a long-term investment as well as inventing tools that you need here and now. And of course, these empires like Heinz and at first Steinway and Budweiser, they became huge, massive businesses. So your chances of becoming a wealthy German were much greater than your chances of becoming a wealthy Irishman, all other things considered. Two guys just arrived on the shore at the same time. One's a German, one's an Irishman. If I'm looking at the two of them, I'm going to go, the German's probably going to be more successful financially. The Irishman might end up a state senator, later could possibly end up a U.S. senator like John Fitzgerald Kennedy, even president. But that was 100 years away. Meanwhile, the Germans just kept piling up the generational wealth. Okay. Let's see. Above all, the Germans were farmers, and their farming communities spreading throughout Appalachian Valley, with their farming communities spreading throughout the Appalachian Valley. Berlins and Frankfurts frequently appear on the map of mid-America towns. For many of them, America did not offer escape so much as an opportunity to improve. Unlike the Irish, Germans moved immediately to open land, heading for the German-like northern tier of the Midwest and populating some of the rapidly growing cities there, such as Cincinnati, which in 1860 had 161,000 people, half of them foreign-born, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and even as far southwest as Texas. One should take care not to emphasize the urban ethnic component of the discord in American life so much. For every bar fight in Boston, there was at least one, if not 10, in saloons on the frontier. In Alabama, for example, the local editor of the Cahaba paper editorialized in 1856 that, quote, guns and pistols were fired in and from the alleyways and streets of the town so frequently it was hardly safe to go from house to house. A knife fight on the floor of the Arkansas House led to the gutting of one state representative over the relatively innocuous issue of putting out a bounty on wolf pelts. And a few years later, in 1847, one set of bank directors at the Farmers and Merchants Bank in Nashville, engaged in a gun battle with the other directors outside the courtroom. Many of these clashes were family feuds, most lacked an ethnic component. One ethnic group that suffered great persecution in modern times came to America virtually unnoticed. The first Jews had come to New Amsterdam in 1654, establishing the first North American synagogue a half a century later. Over time, a thriving community emerged in what became New York, which by 1914 had become home to half of all European Jews living in the United States. By 1850, there were perhaps 30,000 Jews in the United States, but within the next 30 years, the number would grow to more than 500,000. After the boom in textiles in the early 1800s, the Jews emerged as the dominant force in New York's needle trade, owning all but 17 of the 241 clothing firms in New York City in 1885. The largest influx of Jews took place long after the Civil War, when the Russian Jews sought sanctuary from czarist persecutions. Nevertheless, Jews achieved distinctions during the Civil War on both Union and Confederate sides. Best known probably was Judah P. Benjamin, a Louisiana Whig who was the first Jew elected to the U.S. Senate and who served as the Confederacy Secretary of State. But 5 Jews won the Medal of Honor for the Union. Edward Rosewater, Lincoln's telegrapher, was Jewish, and the Cardozo family of New York produced important legal minds both before and after the conflict, including a state Supreme Court Justice, Jacob, and a U.S. State Supreme Court Justice, Benjamin, who followed Louis Brandeis, yet another Jew, on to the Supreme Court. All the immigrant groups found niches and all succeeded, admittedly at different rates. All except one, that is, African Americans, most of whom came to the colonies as slaves, could point to small communities of free men of color in the North and list numerous achievements. Yet their accomplishments only serve to contrast their freedom with the bondage of millions of blacks in the same nation, in some cases, only miles away. So that's where we will stop and pick up there next time. Remember, get your copy of Patriot's History of Globalism, and remember, try out the VIP service for a year. You'll love it. I'll see you back here on Wednesday.